Well, the All Blacks and the Wallabies have just finished the second Bledisloe Cup game in New Zealand, and I've been watching it in the middle of the night here in Cancun, Mexico. Going to give you my feedback about the game straight away, so let's get into it. G'day everyone, welcome to Inside Rugby with Mark. If you haven't been here before, my name is Mark. I'm a retired Kiwi bloke, a huge rugby fan, and I'm living here in Mexico. So it's the middle of the night and I've just watched the All Blacks play against the Wallabies, and here's my report on the game. First of all, it was Sam Cane's 100th cap for the All Blacks, so a huge achievement for him. And a lot of people have been saying that it's been more of a sentimental pick, but Sam Cane has been playing good rugby in the last couple of games, and I think deserved a spot in the starting lineup tonight. So the game got underway and it was all Australia in the beginning. We saw a lot of intensive play from then, multi-phases, and they were really getting on the front foot. And really it was in the first 10 minutes that it was Australia having all of the possession and New Zealand couldn't get their hands on the ball. Australia, I thought, did very well in protecting the ball. They looked at doing multiple phases, and it also all looked very good for them in the opening stanza of the game. Unfortunately, in the first 60 seconds of the game, we saw Taniela Tupou for the Wallabies prop get injured. His left knee was buckled under one of the tackles, and from then on he looked very, very sore indeed. It didn't look like he was going to be able to carry on, but what a soldier he is, Tupou. He stayed on the field and made a difference for sure in the beginning of this game. Now, what I've been most impressed with since Joe Schmidt has been continuing to develop this Australian team has been their patience and consistency with ball in hand. We saw it last week in Australia, and they came out in the first 10 minutes of this game and really put it to New Zealand by remaining patient and going through multiple phases of play. One of the things we did see from New Zealand in their early stanza was their ability to be able to wrap up the defensive plays and actually put some pressure on the Australians in the breakdown. That man that I mentioned, Sam Cane, was doing a lot of the work along with Wallace Satiti and Ardie Savea for New Zealand. So it was going to have to be a good Australian attack that was going to get across the All Blacks line, and that's exactly what happened. We saw Fraser McWright go over the line in the 7th minute of the game after Australia had put on sustained pressure of the All Blacks inside their 22. And the way this game started, it was pretty much like the game ended last weekend in Sydney. It was all Australia taking control, and they had a well-deserved try at that stage of the game. So it was in the 15th minute of the game that we saw the All Blacks break through for their first try, and it came to Sevu Reece, a great play that went out wide. And the All Blacks on the counter-attack were looking very dangerous in this game when they got some ball. The problem for them at this stage of the game is they weren't getting a lot of ball. Now, Reece scored out wide. Beauden Barrett wasn't able to get the conversion over, so Australia were in the lead, and they continued to go further in the lead when penalty was kicked by Noah Lolesio to put them ahead 10 points to 5. But in the 21st minute, we saw something that happened last weekend. We saw Will Jordan go through a pretty weak Australian defensive line to score a good try. Now, Jordan is fantastic at finishing off these types of tries, but one's got to ask again. The Australian defence on this occasion was too passive. They left too many holes, and Jordan was able to pick them off. So that's one thing that Joe Schmidt's going to have to really work on with this team. Beauden Barrett was able to get the conversion. After all, it was right out in front. So the All Blacks hit the lead after 22 minutes, and they're in the lead now by 12 points to 10. So one of the things I've been impressed with these Wallabies is their ability to stay in the game in the last couple of games. They looked good again here in the 35th minute. Noah Lolesio got an opportunity to go for penalty kick. He got it over, and that put Australia in the lead by 13 points to 12 with just a few minutes to go before half time. But as we've seen so many times with the All Blacks, that period of play just close to half time is very, very important. If they're able to score tries, they get some momentum going. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened for Australia on this occasion. They gave away the ball, and it came from a Jake Gordon box kick that didn't find any contestable area on the field. And Will Jordan got the ball from fullback. He counter-attacked it and started to make New Zealand move towards the Australian line. And 30 seconds later, the All Blacks were well onto attack and looking to get over the Australian line on the buzzer of half-time. They did it through Caleb Clark, and it was a telling part of the game, this. The Aussies made a big mistake by not putting that ball out from Jake Gordon when the Aussies were trying to clear the ball from their own 22. It gave New Zealand the opportunity to counter-attack, and in this particular game, the All Blacks were doing that fantastically well. They were running back at the Australians, able to get through their line using Will Jordan and Caleb Clark. And Caleb Clark went over for a try right on half-time after the buzzer had sounded, and it put the All Blacks in the lead. Beauden Barrett had got the conversion over, 19 points to 13 in favour of the All Blacks at half-time. Now, I've got to tell you at this stage, I'm getting more and more impressed with Wallace Satiti in an All Black jersey. He was absolutely fantastic again in that first half. Every time he gets the ball, he seems to do something really, really good with it. He made a couple of breaks. He was brilliant at offloading his passes at the right time. He got through the Australian defence. Standout player for me in the first half as far as I was concerned. The difference in that first half of this game for me was the All Blacks counter-attacking. They looked very, very dangerous. The Australian defence, again, was just a little bit too passive. And it makes me think that when the All Blacks get confronted with a real rush defence, they are going to have problems getting through the line. But Australia just needed to push up a little bit more. They were doing better than they did in Sydney last week. There was no doubt about it, because the All Blacks didn't get away to that really fast start. So they were able to control the ball in the first half and play very well with it. They would have been upset that they went to half-time following the All Blacks by that 6 points that they had gone down. So in that first half, we saw great performances from Sam Cane. He was really busy in the breakdowns, doing a lot of work. Ardie Savea was doing his normal self, but for me, Wallace Satiti was the standout player. TJ Perenara was going okay at halfback, but it was only on the back of the All Blacks counter play that they were doing really good things in this game. The Wallabies, as I said, looked good for the first 20 minutes. They looked like they had a lot of options open to them on attack. And it was just a couple of occasions where they got through the All Black backline, and in particular around the centre area with Rieko Ioane falling off a couple of tackles. We saw Tom Wright go through him. We saw Hunter Paisami go through him. And Len Ekitau got through Rieko Ioane in the first half. So that was an area I was looking at, and it was seeming low. The defensive line for the New Zealand around the outside centres was not keeping pace with what Australia was throwing at them. On a couple of occasions, Australia could have gone in for tries if the last pass had gone to hand. It didn't. They didn't have that final support player there, so the All Blacks came out on top in the first half. So I think at half-time, Joe Schmidt would have been a little bit disappointed that the Aussies weren't on parity with the All Blacks. The All Blacks did very well, of course, of executing their opportunities, putting points on the board. Again, a soft try to Will Jordan, but Caleb Clark earned that try on half-time, and the Wallabies went in with a 6-point margin deficit at half-time. I think Scott Robertson would have been very happy with what he saw in the first half. I think he saw the counter-attacking for the All Blacks being very dangerous, putting the Wallabies under pressure anytime they had the ball, and he was seeing big games again from Wallace Satiti, Ardie Savea and Sam Cane, and I think that would have put a bit of a smile on his face. Beauden Barrett was going okay at number 10, but again, it was on the back of the forwards doing some really good thing, and the counter-attack was working really, really well. The thing that Barrett does well from number 10 is that he moves the ball forward quickly. We didn't see hardly any kicking from him in that first half, and it was enabling the All Blacks to use their men outside wide, and that's where they were counting or getting over the advantage line and getting through the Australian Wallabies. It wasn't so much that we were having that push up through the centres. It was a wide ball that was going out to the Sevu Reeses and the Caleb Clarks that was making the difference for the All Blacks. So rather than their play being busting up through the middle, the All Blacks were putting it out wide. They were using the blind side to effect as well throughout the game in the early stages. And that was creating a lot of space down the right-hand side of the field on a couple of occasions. We saw Ardie Savea go for a good run, Wallace Satiti, and Sevu Reece got the ball a couple of times in open space down the right-hand side of the field. Now, the second half was going to be crucial for both teams. We'd known that the All Blacks have not had a good record so far in the Rugby Championship when it comes to their second half performance. The Wallabies had a great second half last weekend against the All Blacks by winning 14-3 in the second half, and they were probably hoping that they were going to be able to come back at the All Blacks early in the second half. I don't know how Taniela Tupou got to half-time in this game because he was absolutely wounded. He did give away a couple of crucial penalties in that first half, so that was something that Joe Schmidt, I think, would have had a handle on at half-time as well. Players for Australia that stood out for me, Fraser McWright was having a great time in the forwards and getting a lot of breakdown ball for the Wallabies in that first half. Rob Valentini was having some really good runs. Nick Frost did a couple of good things as well. And overall, I thought the Aussies played pretty well in terms of their play and open play. It was just a couple of execution points on the last passes that stopped them from having the lead at half time. So as is normally the case in games like this, the team that scored first in the second half was going to have a lot of momentum, and there was a real battle to start off in the second half. It became very intense. Taniela Tupou only lasted 3 minutes. Unfortunately, he succumbed to another injury in the second half, and he was replaced by Alan Alalatoa after the 43rd minute. But it was a real arm wrestle for the next 10 minutes as both teams were trying to get some ascendancy in this game. The All Blacks were thinking we need to put points on the board in the second half of this game to show that we can close out games. And the Aussies knew that they had to score first in the second half to get the pressure back on the All Blacks. So whoever was going to score first was going to have the big advantage, in my opinion. And it was the All Blacks, and it came through immense pressure, multiple phases of play, and the All Blacks were picking and going towards the Australian line, and it was Tamati Williams that went over and scored a good try for the All Blacks after sustained pressure. The Wallabies did a good job in defence to hold them out for a while, but there was no doubt about it that Tamati Williams got over the try line and scored a good try for the All Blacks. Now, this really gave the All Blacks, I believe, momentum in this game. We still had 23 minutes to go in the game, but by the All Blacks scoring that try, you could see that their confidence was starting to build and they were starting to get more momentum in the game. The defence was starting to be very accurate as well. So whenever Australia did get the ball, they weren't able to penetrate the New Zealand line, and we saw the Australians put multiple phases together throughout several areas in that first 10 minutes of the second half, but the New Zealand defence stood up and was really repelling them. I was very impressed with what I was starting to see from the New Zealand defensive line. They'd come to stop Australia scoring in the second half, and I think that was a good strategic play. People were starting to stand up. We were starting to see big tackles from a lot of the All Blacks, and it was starting to have some pressure telling on the Australian Wallabies. We saw them throwing balls around to nobody at times, running laterally across the field, just trying to get through the New Zealand defence. It was standout work from the All Blacks on those occasions. So there was no doubt about it as we headed into the last 20 minutes of the game. If the All Blacks were to score again, it was going to put this game away from the Aussies. So the Aussies threw everything they had at the All Blacks. But again, the defensive line for the All Blacks was getting better and better as this game went on. And then we got into the 62nd minute and we saw Caleb Clark go over for another try. It was a great piece of work from Damien McKenzie, who had come on the field. And as I've mentioned, if you're going to use Damien McKenzie in this All Black team, then bring him in off the bench. That's where he can make the big impact. And we saw it in that particular play. He caught the tiring Australian defence line out. He put a great pass out to Caleb Clark, who was not going to be stopped that far out from the Australian line. And he went over to really seal this game for the All Blacks. So that was in the 63rd minute of the game. Beauden Barrett got the conversion over, so the All Blacks jumped out to 33 points to 13, and there was going to be no way back for the Wallabies in this game as far as I was concerned. And the Wallabies started throwing everything at the All Blacks, and to the All Blacks' credit, the defence just got better and better as the game went on. It was really the defence that won the All Blacks this game in the second half as far as I was concerned. They did put on a couple of tries. They did win the second half by 14 points to 0. Australia were not able to get over the New Zealand try line in the second half. They weren't able to score any points. And New Zealand were able to shut the game out by putting in some big defensive efforts right across the field. So hats off to all of them for that particular performance. We saw Perenara removed from the game around the 58th minute, and we saw Ratama came on. He kept the momentum going, I thought, but once again, the New Zealand bench didn't have a massive impact in this game. It was more of the players that were already on the field, I felt, that were doing a fantastic job in the defensive line. There was one particular play in the last 8 minutes of the game where their Wallabies put together 24 different phases and the All Black defence held them out. And this is where we're starting to see a bit of growth, I think, in the All Black defensive line. They'd had the game in the bag. They didn't let their they didn't take their pedal off the metal, so to speak, in the defensive line, and they were able to keep the Australians out. So that was a really good sign for the All Blacks. They were still fighting even in the last 10 minutes of the game when they knew the game was in the bag. We saw a couple of basic errors in that last 10 minutes. Damien McKenzie took a kick for touch under no pressure whatsoever and skewed it off his boot. And a couple of other passes went to ground, but all in all, it was a very comprehensive All Black performance, I thought, through the defensive line after they'd scored those good tries in the first half. So it's the first time in the Rugby Championship where the All Blacks have won the second half of a game. On this occasion, it was 14 points to 0 against the Wallabies in the second half. And we saw some very good performances in this game, but I have mentioned in my previous videos in the build up to this game that if the All Blacks were to win this game, do we still have the answers we're looking for in some of these key positional issues of the All Blacks? Wallace Satiti, for me, outstanding player in this game for the All Blacks today, probably the best on the field. Fraser McWright was up there though for Australia, so I'd give him a lot of credit. But I think Wallace Satiti comes out on top for me in the last two games for the All Blacks as an outstanding player. I would still love to see him in the number 8 jersey though. I think he'd go even better from that particular position. I thought the All Blacks, when going forward in an accounting attacking, they looked very dangerous in this game. They looked like they were going to break the line. And when you do give Will Jordan the ball in the right position, he can do those kinds of plays that we saw again today. Beauden Barrett did an okay game for me from number 10. He missed a couple of conversions, but at the same time, he was able to keep the play going, but it was on the back of a good All Black forward performance, particularly in the breakdown area that New Zealand were getting front foot ball and really competing with this Australian Wallaby team. So it's hard to really give a great assessment around Barrett's performance because once again, when the forwards are doing their job, it makes life easier for the number 10. I still remain pretty steadfast in my opinion that we should be giving new players the opportunity. We haven't got a lot of depth in that New Zealand team in the number 10 jersey. And we saw today that if we are going to use Damien McKenzie in that impact position off the bench, it tends to work better for me because he can use his speed and pace when he comes on to crack the defensive line. The thing is, Beauden Barrett can do that off the bench as well. So I think there's still a question mark over that number 10 position and how New Zealand plays that, particularly for the first 60 minutes of the game. For all those Anton Leonard-Brown fans out there, I think he did pretty okay at number 12 today. But again, I'm still not happy with the 12 and 13 combinations in this All Black jersey. As I mentioned, Rieko Ioane led a couple of Australian attacks through the centre lines today, and he was caught out quite often when the Australians attacked through that part of the field. So in addition to the All Blacks scoring some good tries, they got to look at their centre defensive work, because when Australia did attack towards the line in the last few minutes of the game, it was always through the forwards. So it was the New Zealand forwards doing a lot of the defensive work. Australia didn't go too wide and put the pressure on the centres outside as they had done so in the first half and had found New Zealand wanting. So I think that was a bit of a flaw in the Australian play in the second half. They didn't go as wide as they did in the first half and find those gaps through the centre pairing. They tried to play the ball more up through the middle, and it didn't work out because the New Zealand defence was too good. This was a much better game by the All Blacks. They deserved the win. I felt as though the Australian defence, though, fell off in the second half. And again, they were a little bit too passive. So the scoreline probably flattered the All Blacks a little bit because they were allowed a couple of tries that were quite opportunistic. But at the same time, the All Blacks looked very good when they were on that counter-attack. And that's the kind of weaponry that they've got when they went out wide. Sevu Reece did okay on the wing for me today. I'd give him a good mark for playing the game that he did. But again, I'd still like to see Caleb Clark and Will Jordan on the wing and put Beauden Barrett at fullback. So the All Blacks, it's going to be interesting now as we move forward and they start their Northern Tour. Their first game is against Japan and Eddie Jones's team before they get over there to Europe. So the final score in this game, the All Blacks 33 to the Wallabies 13. The All Blacks win the Bledisloe Series 2-0 this year. And it means the Australian Wallabies have not won in New Zealand for 23 years. It's a record that they probably don't want to be reminded of. But at the same time, there's been enough in the Australian play in the last 2 weeks for me to continue to support Joe Schmidt and his philosophy with this Australian team. I really think they're starting to build towards something. And by the time they kick off their Northern Tour in early November, I think we're going to see an Australian outfit that's going to be really able to compete with those top teams in Europe. Time will tell whether I'm right or not on that one. So the nutshell of this one for me, a comprehensive win by New Zealand, set up by some fantastic counter-attacking play in the first half. They came out firing again in the second half. It was an arm wrestle for the first 10 minutes or so, but when New Zealand got that first try in the second half to Tamaiti Williams, it opened up the floodgates a little bit. Caleb Clark finished it off with that second try of his in the second half, and the All Blacks were home well and truly with about 15 minutes to go. They were able to keep the pressure on through that defensive work up until the 80th minute mark, and that was a very, very impressive part of their game today, their defensive work, that's for sure. My man of the match was Wallace Satiti for the All Blacks again today. I thought he had an outstanding game. Will Jordan was right up there as well, as was Caleb Clark. So there was a couple of good players. Sam Cane celebrated his 100th cap today with a great performance, I thought, for the All Blacks. And Ardie Savea was very good as well. So a comprehensive win for the All Blacks. Across the field, they had some very good players. But for me, some of the questions around the key positional changes have not been answered because we're not seeing some of these players get an opportunity. I was thinking as I watched the game, what would Harry Plummer be doing in a game like this? Could he also impact through passing to his outside backs like Beauden Barrett was doing it? Was Billy Proctor going to make a big difference in the Rieko Ioane position today? That was something that I was thinking about when I watched this game. But however, at this stage, from Razor Robertson, we haven't seen those opportunities given to those players. We'll have to wait and see whether they happen against Japan. Okay, so there you go. That's my review of the game between the All Blacks and the Wallabies today. Just played minutes ago in Wellington in New Zealand. The All Blacks get the hoodoo off their shoulders in Wellington for now. That's 3 wins from 10 games, so they're starting to improve their winning percentage in Wellington. And I'm going to have lots more videos coming up talking about this All Black performance today and also the team as we move forward. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this game, where you were watching it from in the world. Did you get along to the Cake Tin in Wellington, the Sky Stadium, to watch the game live today? Let me know. I'd love to hear your views and opinions on what it was like sitting in that stadium when the crowd were singing Sweet Caroline and getting behind the New Zealand All Blacks as they were running in a few tries. Now, if you appreciate the content I'm putting together here on Inside Rugby with Mark, here's 5 ways that you can support me on the channel. I'd be really grateful if you do that. Trying to build a fantastic global rugby community here where we can talk about all the things that are going on in international rugby and enjoying it across the world. So I'd love you to come along and support the channel. As I say, I'm going to be back again really soon with that other game from the Rugby Championship, the final game in round 6 of this year's competition between South Africa and Argentina, coming to us from South Africa, so make sure you check that one out. Okay, it's time for me to get a little bit of rest before the next game, so you stay well, stay safe, keep enjoying your rugby no matter where you are in the world, and I'll see you again really soon right here on Inside Rugby with Mark. Until then, it's adios from beautiful Mexico. Bye for now.